Kieran had never expected his mission to take such a strange turn. The mission was simple enough: survey an uncharted planet, make contact with the alien species, and gather any valuable information. It was supposed to be just another routine task for the elite squad of human soldiers. But everything went wrong. The storm hit suddenly, and their ship, a sleek vessel designed for interplanetary travel, crashed onto the surface of an alien world. Kieran was the only one to survive. The wreckage of their ship lay scattered around him, the harsh winds of the alien planet howling in the distance. It was barren here, rocky terrain with sharp, jagged cliffs, and a sky that appeared far too dark and cold for comfort. He quickly realized that his chances of getting rescued were slim. With no other options, Kieran set out to explore his surroundings. He didn't know how far he would have to travel to find help, but his instincts told him to keep moving. He couldn't just sit and wait to die in the wreckage. He needed to find out if there were any inhabitants here. Perhaps someone could help him, or at least he hoped they would. Hours turned into days as Kieran trekked through the rough landscape. His food and water supplies were running low, and exhaustion was starting to set in. He knew that if he didn't find shelter soon, he would not make it much longer. But just when he thought all hope was lost, he saw something. In the distance, a large structure stood against the backdrop of the harsh terrain, something that looked like a fortress. He made his way towards it, knowing that this could be his only chance. As he approached, the reality of the situation sank in. The building wasn't just a fortress, it was an entire alien city, towering over him with technology unlike anything he had ever seen. The walls shimmered with a strange light, and there was a low hum that vibrated through the ground. Kieran hesitated at the edge of the city, unsure of what he would face inside. He had been trained for combat, not diplomacy, and he had no idea how the inhabitants of this world would treat him. The last thing he wanted was to make a wrong move and end up as a prisoner or worse. Taking a deep breath, he stepped forward, hoping for the best. The city was eerily quiet as he entered. It was nothing like the bustling, chaotic places he had seen back home. Instead, everything was orderly and precise. Alien figures in sleek uniforms moved through the streets, going about their business without paying any attention to him. Kieran's presence must have been expected, but it was clear that no one was too eager to make contact with him. He was just another stranger in their world. Soon he was escorted to a large building at the center of the city, where he was met by a group of alien soldiers. They didn't speak much, just directed him to a holding area. Kieran didn't resist. He knew better than to fight back in a foreign world, especially when he had no idea what he was up against. The room he was placed in was cold and sterile, with no windows and only a single metal door. Kieran sat on the floor, his mind racing. Who were these aliens? What did they want with him? And why hadn't they killed him yet? His training told him to be alert, to prepare for anything, but deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. Hours passed without any sign of life. No one came to check on him. No food, no water. He couldn't help but wonder what was going on. He wasn't sure if it was a good sign or a bad one that he hadn't been interrogated yet. Perhaps they were waiting for something. It wasn't until the next day that he got his answer. The door to his holding room opened and two tall, imposing figures stepped inside. They were dressed in black armor, with glowing insignia on their chest plates. One of them, a woman, stepped forward. She had dark skin, and her eyes glowed with an almost unnatural light. She was striking, powerful, and carried herself with the confidence of a leader. "Human," she said, her voice cold but commanding. "I am Commander Valora of the Lumerian fleet. You will speak only when spoken to." Kieran stood up, feeling the weight of her presence. He was a soldier, trained to face any enemy, but there was something about this alien that made him pause. She didn't seem like just another soldier. She was different. I didn't mean to intrude," Kieran said, his voice hoarse from the dry air. "I crash-landed here. I don't know what your people want with me, but I'll cooperate if you help me get back to my ship." Valora didn't respond right away. She only studied him. her eyes narrowing as if she were trying to read his every thought. Kieran couldn't tell if she was sizing him up or just deciding what to do next. The silence stretched on until it became unbearable. "You are weak," Valora finally said. "You are lucky to have survived. We do not welcome outsiders here." Kieran's stomach twisted. He knew that in a situation like this, he had to be careful with his words. "I didn't come here to invade. I just need help. My people—" "We do not care about your people," Valora interrupted sharply. "You are a prisoner now. Until we decide your fate, you will stay here." Kieran felt a cold shiver run down his spine. A prisoner? The thought hit him like a brick. He was stuck here on a strange planet with no way out. His mission had turned into a nightmare, but he wasn't about to give up just yet. He had to find a way to survive, even if it meant being stuck in this holding room forever. Days passed without any further interaction. Valora came and went, always watching him from afar, but never speaking to him directly. Kieran began to wonder if she was waiting for him to make a move, some sign that he wasn't just another helpless human. But he wasn't sure what kind of move he was supposed to make. Then on the 5th day, something changed. Valora appeared again, her eyes still cold, but with something new in them. Curiosity. She looked at him for a long moment before speaking. "You are different from the others," she said. "I have been watching you. You are strong, even in your weakness. I may have use for you." Kieran didn't know what she meant by that, but he knew one thing for sure. Things were about to get interesting. Kieran's life in the Lumerian city had settled into an odd routine. For the past few days, he had been allowed more freedom within the confines of the compound. He was still a prisoner, of course, but now he could walk around the designated area without the constant surveillance of guards. There was no attempt to communicate beyond basic orders, no questions about his mission or his people. He was, for all intents and purposes, just another being in a foreign land, held captive by the decisions of Commander Valora. The isolation, however, had begun to gnaw at him. He had no answers to his questions. Why had he been brought here? What was the purpose of his captivity? And why had Valora not acted more aggressively towards him like he had expected? Other than brief encounters when she would check on him, he had only seen her once more. She came in silence, inspecting him as though he were an object, not a person. But then, on the 6th day, things changed. It began with the unmistakable sound of a door unlocking and the quiet footfall of heavy boots. Kieran looked up from where he sat staring at the blank walls of his room. His pulse quickened. He had grown used to the silence, but now there was a new tension in the air. This time, it wasn't just any guard walking through the door. It was Valora. She entered, her sharp eyes scanning him from head to toe. There was something different about her this time, an intensity he hadn't noticed before. She didn't speak immediately. Instead, she simply observed him, as if trying to gauge his reaction. Kieran stood, nervous, yet composed, trying to maintain his military discipline. "Stand tall, human," she commanded, her voice cold but not unkind. Kieran did as instructed, standing straight, his back rigid. He was still trying to make sense of why she seemed to be watching him with growing interest. For several long moments, neither spoke. The silence in the room felt thick and heavy, as though there were unspoken words hanging between them, waiting for the right time to be uttered. Kieran couldn't stand it. His curiosity finally got the best of him. "Why am I still here?" Kieran asked, his voice steady but carrying the weight of frustration. "You've kept me alive for days. Why?" Valora's gaze flickered with something akin to curiosity, but her expression remained neutral. "You are alive because I have chosen to keep you alive. That is all you need to know, human." Kieran tried to mask the frustration creeping into his voice. He had to know more. He had to understand what game she was playing. "You've been watching me, observing me like some kind of specimen. What do you want from me?" The commander tilted her head slightly, her eyes narrowing just a fraction. "I have been observing your reactions, your will to survive. Most humans I encounter fall to fear. They break under pressure. But you do not." Kieran felt a jolt of surprise at her words. He had been expecting hostility or at least dismissiveness, but instead, she was showing something entirely unexpected: respect. It was subtle, but it was there. For a fleeting moment, Kieran allowed himself to hope. Perhaps this was the beginning of something more, something that would give him a chance to escape this place. "I'm not like most humans," Kieran replied, his voice softer, but still carrying the edge of defiance. "You might have captured me, but I'll fight until I can't fight anymore." Valora's lips curved upward into a slight, almost imperceptible smile. It was a rare expression, one that softened her usually stern features. "I see that now," she murmured. "That is why I have decided to allow you more freedom. Perhaps you are not as useless as I first thought." Kieran's heart skipped a beat. More freedom? What did that mean? Before he could ask, she turned and motioned for him to follow her. "Come," she said. "There is something I wish to show you." Kieran followed her cautiously, his mind racing with questions. Where was she taking him? What was this all about? For the first time, he wasn't sure whether to feel anxious or hopeful. The alien commander, who had treated him like an afterthought for days, was now speaking to him as if he were an equal. She had even complimented him in her own way. They walked through the corridors of the compound, which grew increasingly complex and vast. The walls were adorned with strange symbols and glowing inscriptions that Kieran could not understand. The air felt dense, filled with a strange hum, as if the entire facility was alive with energy. At last, they reached a large room. It was circular, with a high ceiling that was illuminated by soft blue light. The room was unlike anything Kieran had ever seen. Sleek, futuristic technology surrounded them, but there was also an ancient quality to the space. It was clear that this was a place of importance to the Lumarians. "Sit," Valora instructed, gesturing to a low bench in the center of the room. Kieran sat down hesitantly. He had no idea what this meeting was about, but he knew one thing for certain: the commander wasn't here just to talk. There was something more behind her actions, and he had to find out what it was. Valora took a seat across from him, her posture straight and commanding. Her eyes locked onto his, studying him as if evaluating his very soul. "You are far from your people," she said, her voice quieter now, almost reflective. "The humans I've encountered are often selfish, driven by their desires. But you are different. I sense something in you that I do not often find." Kieran was taken aback by her words. "What do you mean? What do you sense?" Valora leaned forward slightly, her eyes softening. "You are resilient. You do not allow fear to control you. Most would have begged for mercy by now, but you have not. You hold on to something beyond survival." Kieran opened his mouth to speak, but Valora raised her hand to stop him. "I do not need your words. I can see it in you. You understand the value of life in a way others do not." She paused, then added, "You have earned my respect." Kieran's mind raced as her words sank in. Respect? From her? This wasn't what he had expected. He had assumed that Valora saw him as an enemy, a mere obstacle to be dealt with. Yet here she was, acknowledging his strength in a way no one else had. It was a surprising admission, one that filled him with a strange sense of pride. "I didn't choose this," Kieran finally said. "I didn't choose to be here, but I'll make the best of it, whatever happens." Valora studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I believe you will. Perhaps there is more to you than I first thought." In that moment, Kieran realized something important. He wasn't just a prisoner anymore. The way Valora spoke, the way she treated him, it was clear that something had shifted between them. Respect had begun to form where there had been only wariness before. Kieran wasn't sure what this meant for the future, but for the first time since his arrival on this strange planet, he allowed himself to feel a glimmer of hope. As they continued to speak, the air between them seemed to shift, charged with an unspoken understanding. There was a long road ahead, one filled with uncertainty and likely danger. But for now, Kieran felt as though he had earned a small victory. He wasn't just the human prisoner anymore. He was something more. The days that followed Kieran's conversation with Commander Valora were a whirlwind of uncertainty and strange new developments. While he had gained her respect, he still didn't fully understand what that meant in the context of their interaction. Was she simply acknowledging his resilience, or was there something more? But then one morning Valora summoned him once more. This time, her tone was different. There was an edge to her voice, one that sent a ripple of unease through Kieran's chest. She had a new directive for him, something that would take him even further into the heart of Lumarian culture. He was escorted to a vast hall, a towering structure that seemed to stretch endlessly upwards. The air was thick with anticipation, and Kieran could feel the weight of history in every step he took. The walls were covered in intricate symbols and designs, glowing faintly with an eerie, otherworldly light. As he walked, Kieran couldn't shake the feeling that he was being led into something far beyond his understanding. At the end of the long corridor, they arrived at the heart of the building, a vast chamber filled with Lumarian soldiers and officials, all gathered in reverence. The sight was both awe-inspiring and overwhelming. The chamber was circular, with a massive central platform raised high above the ground, lit by floating orbs of light. It was a place of great significance, and Kieran knew this wasn't just another routine gathering. Something important was about to unfold. Valora stepped forward, her presence commanding the room. She wore ceremonial armor, unlike the usual combat gear she had worn during their interactions. This armor gleamed with an ethereal glow, and Kieran couldn't help but be struck by her commanding presence. Her posture was straight and unyielding, her gaze focused with determination. "Tonight, we honor our ancient traditions," Valora said, her voice echoing across the chamber. "Tonight we strengthen the bond between our people and the one who has proven himself worthy." Kieran felt a knot tighten in his stomach. What did she mean by worthy? His mind raced, trying to make sense of her words, but there was little time to process as the ceremony began. A quiet hum filled the air, and several alien figures approached the central platform, their movements precise and deliberate. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation. Kieran, still unsure of his role in this, was led to a spot near the edge of the platform. Valora turned to him, her expression unreadable. "You will participate in this ceremony, human," she said, her tone firm. "You will prove your worth." Kieran's heart raced. He wasn't sure what she meant by "prove your worth," but he had little choice but to follow her lead. As the ceremony began, several other Lumarians stood in formation, their eyes trained on him. He could feel the weight of their stares, the judgment in the air. His every move was scrutinized, and he knew that this was a test. But for what? And why him? As the ritual progressed, Kieran realized that the ceremony was a rite of passage, a tradition that marked the transition from warrior to leader. It was meant to show not only strength but also the ability to command respect. As each participant stepped forward, they were asked to perform a symbolic act of bravery, an act that demonstrated their readiness to take on the responsibilities of leadership. When it was his turn, Kieran stepped forward, the eyes of the entire assembly upon him. His heart pounded in his chest, but he held his head high, trying to mask the nervousness that gnawed at him. Valora was watching intently, her gaze sharp and unblinking. He couldn't afford to fail now. He had to prove to her, and to the Lumarians, that he belonged here, at least for this moment. The task was simple yet deeply symbolic. Kieran was asked to face an obstacle, a large, jagged piece of alien technology that had been set in the center of the platform. It was a relic of a past battle, a reminder of the sacrifices made for the survival of the Lumarians. He was told to approach it, to touch it, and in doing so, honor the warriors who had come before him. It wasn't the physical challenge that frightened him. Kieran had faced much worse in his time as a soldier. What unnerved him was the weight of the moment, the realization that this simple act could determine how the Lumarians would view him. He wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. He was fighting for respect, for his place among them. Kieran approached the relic cautiously, his fingers brushing against the cold surface. As he touched it, he felt a surge of energy ripple through him, as if the object itself was alive. A strange warmth spread through his body, and for a brief moment he felt connected to the history of the Lumarians, to the warriors who had once stood where he stood now. It was an overwhelming sensation, one that left him breathless. When he pulled his hand away, the chamber erupted in a chorus of murmurs. Kieran's heart skipped a beat. Had he failed? The tension in the room was thick enough to cut through with a knife, but Valora stepped forward, her expression unreadable. "You have done it," she said, her voice steady. "You have honored our past and proven yourself worthy." Kieran exhaled, not realizing he had been holding his breath. The relief that washed over him was palpable, but it didn't last long. Valora's gaze softened, and for the first time, Kieran saw something new in her eyes, something that went beyond mere respect. There was something else there, something deeper. "I see now that you are not just a prisoner," Valora continued. "You are a warrior in your own right." The words hung in the air like a weight, heavy with meaning. Kieran had never expected this. A warrior? He had simply been trying to survive, to make it out of this alien world alive. But now Valora was treating him as an equal, something he hadn't dared to hope for. But the ceremony was far from over. As the ritual came to a close, Kieran stood by Valora's side, still processing what had just happened. The Lumarian soldiers and officials began to disperse, their quiet murmurs filling the air. Yet Valora remained, her gaze never leaving him. "Tonight you have proven yourself worthy," she said once more, her voice softer now. "But there is more for you to learn. The Lumarians are a proud people, and you will need to understand us fully if you are to stay here. But tonight you are not just a prisoner. You are something more." Kieran nodded, still trying to make sense of the words that had been spoken. He wasn't sure what this meant for his future, but he knew one thing for certain. He was no longer just an outsider. He had earned a place among them, and that was a victory in itself. As Valora turned to leave, she paused, her eyes meeting his once more. "Prepare yourself, human. The future holds more than you can imagine." And with that, she walked away, leaving Kieran to contemplate the strange new path that lay before him. The days that followed the ceremony were filled with a strange mixture of anticipation and uncertainty. Kieran had never expected to find himself in the position he was in now. He had come to this alien planet as a prisoner, a survivor of a crash landing, but now he was something more, a respected figure among the Lumarians. The respect Valora had shown him, and the ceremony that had solidified his place among them, had left him with more questions than answers. But even as he grappled with his new role, one thing became clear. His relationship with Commander Valora was evolving. The bond between them was shifting, growing stronger in subtle ways. Where there had once been coldness, there was now something more. A quiet understanding, a connection that neither of them could fully explain. Kieran had expected to be nothing more than a passing curiosity to her, but now he wasn't so sure. For the first time since his arrival on this strange planet, Kieran found himself feeling an odd sense of belonging. Valora had not just given him respect. She had offered him something far more valuable, a chance. A chance to understand their culture, to learn what made the Lumarians tick, and perhaps to find a way home. But that was easier said than done. He couldn't shake the feeling that the path before him wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about something deeper. One evening, as Kieran sat alone in his quarters, he found himself reflecting on the events of the past few days. The memories of the ceremony still lingered in his mind. The feel of the ancient Lumarian relic. The powerful energy that had surged through him and Valora's quiet praise. But more than that, he couldn't help but think about her. The alien commander who had once dismissed him as nothing more than a captive had become something more to him, an enigma he couldn't quite figure out. He was lost in thought when the door to his room opened without warning. Kieran looked up to see Valora standing in the doorway, her silhouette framed by the light from the corridor. She wasn't in her ceremonial armor this time, but in her standard combat gear. Even in the simplicity of her uniform, there was something imposing about her, something that commanded attention. "May I come in?" Valora asked, her voice steady but with an underlying softness. Kieran nodded, somewhat surprised by her request. Of course, he said, his voice calm despite the questions racing through his mind. Valora stepped inside, the door closing behind her with a soft click. She stood there for a moment as if gathering her thoughts before she finally spoke. I wanted to thank you, she said, her eyes meeting his. For your actions in the ceremony. You proved yourself not just as a fighter, but as someone who understands what it means to be a part of something greater than yourself. Kieran blinked in surprise. He hadn't expected any further acknowledgement. I was just doing what I had to do, he replied, his voice modest. I didn't know what to expect, I just wanted to survive. Valora tilted her head slightly, a faint smile tugging at the corners of her lips. Survival is more than just staying alive, she said softly. It's about understanding the world around you and finding a way to contribute. You've done that, even in ways you may not fully realize. Kieran's heart raced as her words sank in. It was strange to hear her speak so openly, so kindly. For all her power and authority, Valora was beginning to reveal a side of herself that Kieran had not expected. She wasn't just a leader, she was a person, someone with her own struggles, her own burdens. What happens now? Kieran asked, his voice more uncertain than he would have liked. Valora's expression shifted slightly, a hint of something unreadable in her eyes. Now we continue. There is much for you to learn, Kieran, much more than you think. The use of his name caught him off guard. She had never referred to him by name before, always keeping things formal or impersonal. But now it seemed different. There was a familiarity in her tone, a quiet intimacy that hadn't been there before. Learn about what? He asked, genuinely curious. There is much to our culture that you do not understand, Valora said. We are not just warriors. We are people, bound by our traditions, our honor, our history. You will need to learn these things if you are to stay here, if you are to continue to earn the respect of our people. Kieran nodded slowly, taking in her words. He had known that he would need to adapt to survive, but now he realized just how deep that adaptation would need to go. He wasn't just learning how to survive on this planet. He was learning how to integrate into a completely foreign society. I'm willing to learn, he said quietly. I want to understand more. About you. About your people. Valora's gaze softened slightly, and for a moment Kieran thought he saw a flicker of something in her eyes. A vulnerability, perhaps? It was gone almost as quickly as it appeared, but it left him wondering what was really going on inside her mind. I believe you, Valora replied, her voice quiet. And that is why I am giving you this opportunity. You are not just a captive anymore, Kieran. You have earned something more. You have earned a place among us. Kieran felt a rush of emotions. Respect, yes, he had earned that. But what she was offering him now was more than just a place among the Lumerians. It was an understanding. It was a chance to belong, to be something more than just a human lost in an alien world. For the first time since he had crash-landed on this planet, he felt like he had a purpose. I won't let you down, Kieran said, his voice filled with determination. I'll prove myself. Valora's expression softened, and she took a step closer. I know you will, she said quietly. But there is one more thing you must understand. There is more at stake here than just your survival. We are fighting for the future of our people, and you. She paused, her eyes meeting his with a strange intensity. You may just be the key to that future. Kieran's breath caught in his throat. What did she mean? How could he possibly be the key to their future? He had no answers, but he knew one thing for certain. The journey he had started was far from over. As Valora turned to leave, Kieran felt a strange pull, a desire to understand her, to learn more about the woman who had gone from his captor to something more. But he also felt something else, something deeper, something that, until now, he had been afraid to admit. A connection. a bond. And in that moment, he realized that his place among the Lumarians wasn't just about survival. It was about something more, something he couldn't yet name. Kieran stood on the balcony of the high tower, staring out at the alien city below. The night was silent, except for the occasional rustle of the wind and the soft hum of the city's advanced technology. He had spent weeks here now, and while the foreign world had slowly begun to feel less alien, the questions in his mind remained. What did this new life mean for him? Was he truly a part of this place, or was he simply being kept alive out of some strange sense of obligation? Valora had said that he wasn't just a prisoner anymore. She had said that he had earned a place among the Lumarians. But what did that mean? And why had she chosen him? Why had she decided that he, someone who had crash-landed on her planet, with nothing to offer, was worthy of such an opportunity? The weight of those thoughts pressed on his chest. Kieran wasn't used to feeling this way. He was a soldier, trained to focus on the task at hand, to survive, to fight, and to push through whatever challenges came his way. But this was different. There was more at stake here than just survival. The sound of footsteps behind him made him turn. Valora stood in the doorway, watching him with a look that was difficult to read. She wore her usual combat uniform, but the air around her was different. There was a tension to it, something Kieran couldn't quite place. "You're deep in thought," Valora said, her voice calm but with an edge that suggested she was carefully considering her words. Kieran didn't immediately answer. Instead, he took a deep breath, turning to face her. "I've been thinking about everything, about why I'm here, why you brought me into this." Valora's gaze softened, and she stepped forward. "You don't understand yet, do you?" she asked, her voice gentler now. Kieran shook his head. "No, I don't. I don't understand why you gave me a chance, why you let me prove myself, why you treat me differently from the others." "You don't see the bigger picture," Valora said, her tone more thoughtful now. She moved to stand beside him, her gaze also directed out over the city. "The Lumarians are a proud people, but we are facing a crisis. Our way of life is threatened by forces beyond our control. We cannot survive if we continue to fight alone, but we also cannot survive without unity." Kieran listened closely. His curiosity piqued. He had known something was off, something important that was beyond the scope of his understanding. But this was the first real glimpse into the depth of their struggle. "I don't know how I fit into that," Kieran admitted, his voice filled with a mixture of confusion and determination. "I'm just a human. Why would my survival matter to you?" Valora turned to face him, her expression serious. "Because, Kieran, you are not just any human. You've shown us something we've lost, something we need. You've shown us resilience, strength, and the willingness to sacrifice for others. It's not something we often see, even among our own kind." The words struck Kieran harder than he expected. He had never thought of himself as anything special. He had simply done what was needed to survive, to get by. But it seemed that to the Lumarians, those very qualities made him stand out, and the realization made him uncomfortable. He hadn't come here to be a symbol, to become part of their struggle. He had come here to live, to find a way home. "But that's just it," Valora continued. "You're not just here to survive. You're here because you've become a part of something much bigger. Our people. We need something more than just strength. We need hope. We need someone who can see beyond our own struggles and help us find a way forward." Kieran was silent for a long time, letting her words settle in his mind. He had thought about survival in simple terms. Getting out alive, getting back home. But this was different. The stakes had changed. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for something much bigger than that. But even as he processed her words, doubt crept in. Was he really ready for this? He had barely understood the situation he had walked into, and now he was supposed to help them save their people? He wasn't sure if he was equipped for something so monumental. "I don't know if I can do what you're asking," Kieran said, quietly, his voice filled with uncertainty. Valora's gaze softened and she placed a hand on his shoulder. I'm not asking you to do it alone. I'm asking you to be a part of it. We don't expect you to have all the answers, but we believe that you can help us find a way forward. The sincerity in her voice was impossible to ignore. For the first time since he had arrived, Kieran saw her not just as a commander, but as someone who was deeply invested in the survival of her people. She wasn't just using him. She was asking for his help, as an equal, and that realization shifted something inside him. Kieran looked out at the city once more, the weight of Valora's words hanging in the air. The city was full of life, but there was an underlying sense of tension, of people struggling against something much bigger than they could handle alone. He knew that the Lumerians couldn't do it by themselves. They needed allies, new ideas, new strength. And maybe, just maybe, he could be that ally. I'll help, he said, his voice filled with determination. I'll help however I can. Valora's face lit up with a small smile, and for the first time Kieran saw the deep appreciation in her eyes. She didn't say anything right away, but her expression said it all. She was grateful. Grateful not just for his strength, but for his willingness to stand beside them. You have earned more than just my respect, Kieran, she said softly. You've earned the trust of our people, and that is something not many have. Kieran nodded, his heart swelling with a strange sense of pride. But there was still one thing that lingered in his mind, one question that he hadn't yet dared to ask. You said I've earned your trust, Kieran said, his voice quieter now. But what about us? Valora turned to him, her eyes locking onto his with an intensity that sent a shiver down his spine. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the silence stretching out between them. And then, without warning, Valora stepped closer, closing the gap between them. Her presence was overwhelming, her gaze unwavering. Us? She repeated softly. Perhaps you are more than just a prisoner to me, Kieran. The words hung in the air like a delicate thread, each one carrying a weight that neither of them could fully understand. Kieran's heart raced as he tried to make sense of what was happening between them. There was something there, something deeper than just respect, something that neither of them had expected. I don't know what this means, Kieran said, his voice hushed, as if afraid to break the moment. But I'm willing to find out. Valora's eyes softened, and for a brief moment there was something in her gaze that made Kieran feel more connected to her than he ever had before. The tension that had once separated them seemed to dissolve in that instant, replaced by something more profound. We'll find out together, Valora said quietly. And in that moment Kieran knew that whatever came next, they would face it side by side.